Blood and power were the twin fixations that dominated Harry VIII's rule. As his swollen body decayed from inside during the final winter days of 1547, England's most infamous monarch confronted his approaching death with the same merciless precision that led him to execute 2 queens and numerous adversaries. "The lion is dying," whispered courtiers behind closed doors, yet his claws stayed razor-sharp until the very end. The path to this grotesque conclusion had started many years before, when he was a striking, athletic prince, admired throughout Europe for his vitality and charisma. How did this shining Renaissance figure become the monstrous despot gasping for air in the candlelit rooms of Whitehall Palace? The explanation lies not only in his notorious marriages, but also in a series of medical disasters that warped both his body and mind beyond recognition. By January of 1547, Harry was scarcely identifiable as the man who had once jousted with the champions of Christendom. His body had turned into a war zone of ailments, with legs covered in festering ulcers that gave off a stench so terrible that those around him often struggled to keep from vomiting in his presence. The king was now reliant on mechanical aids to support his massive frame, which some reports claim had grown close to 400 pounds. His once striking visage had become distorted and swollen, with eyes sunken deeply into skin that had turned a sickly shade of yellow. The royal doctors had depleted their limited medical means to help him. Traditional treatments such as bloodletting, herbal mixtures, and prayers all failed to alleviate the assortment of illnesses afflicting their ruler. Most scholars today believe Harry suffered from type 2 diabetes and gout, along with possibly osteomyelitis, a painful bone infection that could account for the persistent agony in his legs. Even more concerning was the king's mental decline. His once famous temper had escalated into violent outbursts mixed with spells of confused exhaustion. Despite the looming threat of death, the struggle for succession dominated the royal court. Harry's third wife, Jane Simmons, had at last given him a male child, the delicate 9-year-old Eddie. However, influential groups were already maneuvering to control the young heir after Harry's passing. The traditional Catholic faction, led by Thomas Howard, faced competition from the Protestant reformers under Edward Seymour, the boy's uncle. Harry, ever suspicious and alert until the end, was painfully aware of these rivalries, authorizing execution orders even as holding a pen became a challenge. The king's swiftly worsening condition was kept one of the realm's best-kept secrets. Official announcements continued to portray Harry as robust and lively, but the truth was starkly different. Those allowed into his sick chamber were met with a grim scene, a massive royal bed covered in somber drapery, and the sickly sweet stench of decay faintly hidden by the scent of burning incense. At the heart of the story stood the rugged figure of a man who once embodied the strength of England itself. Palace workers murmured about hearing the king's agonized screams reverberate through the stony halls of Whitehall. Harry's leg ulcers inflicted him with unbearable pain, so intense that the slightest movement could provoke violent spasms. His doctors tried all sorts of poultices ranging from boiled onions to powdered human skull. These desperate treatments only worsened his misery. A more effective relief came from generous doses of opium which eased the pain, but further clouded the king's already declining mind. The mental anguish was as intense as the physical torment. Harry had once been the most feared man in England. His words held the power of life and death over any subject. Yet now he was powerless against the rebellion of his broken body. Court documents reveal his growing erratic behavior, including episodes of near madness, when he muttered about the specters of executed enemies, or called out for wives long deceased during moments of clarity. The king fixated on revising his will, desperately wanting control over his lineage's future, even beyond death. Those around him observed with concern his fluctuating religious views during his final days after breaking from Rome to crown himself leader of the Church of England. Harry appeared haunted by spiritual uncertainty, demanding Catholic rites one day, then reaffirming Protestant beliefs the next. Following this, his personal chaplain documented how the king would wake in terror from nightmares. claiming to see the faces of Thomas Miller, Anna Bennett, and other victims of his rule standing silently at the foot of his bed, judging him without a word. The king's approaching death created a perilous power void that his advisors hurriedly sought to fill. The Privy Council split into rival groups, each plotting to secure favorable positions for the upcoming regency. Thomas Howard, who had survived many years of court intrigue, found himself outplayed by the Protestant faction. In a final sign of Harry's ruthless nature, Howard was condemned to death for treason in the name of the dying king, though he eventually escaped execution because Harry passed away before the sentence could be carried out. January 27, 1547, marked the onset of Harry's ultimate decline. Witnesses described how the king suffered a seizure so severe that his attendants had to restrain him to avoid harm. After the episode, Harry had difficulty speaking, with partial paralysis on his right side, a clear indication of what modern medicine would recognize as a major stroke. The court physicians, well aware that failing to save the monarch could mean disgrace or even death for themselves, worked desperately to save their patient. They applied hot irons to his skin and forced unpleasant medicinal mixtures down his throat. During this crisis, access to the royal bedchamber was tightly controlled at all times. Under the control of Harry's most reliable advisor, Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, this secrecy fulfilled a practical role beyond mere respect. News of the monarch's approaching death could provoke untimely struggles for power, or even foreign attack. Cranmer made sure that only the absolutely necessary attendants were allowed inside, and each person was bound by a strict vow of silence about the king's condition. Even Queen Catherine Parr Harry's sixth and surviving spouse was kept away during some of the most critical moments. The king fluctuated between consciousness and unconsciousness as January changed into February. During brief moments of awareness, Harry reportedly expressed rising fear regarding his impending judgment before God. The man who had ordered the execution of 2 wives, countless nobles, and thousands of common people, now faced his own end with growing anxiety. According to the diary of one attendant, the king was heard mumbling prayers and pleading for forgiveness in his sleep, a stark difference from the resolute ruler who transformed England's religious framework through sheer determination. Official court documents unveiled the extraordinary efforts made to maintain Harry's remaining dignity in these last days. As his bodily functions deteriorated, teams of servants labored in shifts to handle the increasingly unpleasant duties of cleaning and repositioning the enormous royal figure. The ulcers on his legs had worsened so much that bone was said to be visible through the decaying flesh. The foul odor. The situation became so unbearable that scented handkerchiefs turned into indispensable items for anyone stepping into the royal chamber, and windows were thrown wide open despite the harsh winter air whenever the king lost consciousness. By February the 27th, even the elaborate illusion that the king might recover could no longer be upheld within the palace circles. Archbishop Crown was urgently called to the royal bedside as Harry's breathing grew more strained. Contemporary descriptions reveal that the king, unable to speak, was asked to squeeze Cranmer's hand if he trusted in Christ, rather than in the religious rituals he had once revered. Harry reportedly squeezed with his last ounce of strength before slipping into his final coma, a touching moment frequently quoted by Protestant historians as proof of a deathbed conversion. The king passed away before dawn on January the 28th of 1547. Even in death, Harry's imposing physical presence filled the royal chamber, his body a disturbing symbol of indulgence and agony. The official cause of death was noted simply as natural decline, although modern medical interpretations suggest a deadly combination of heart failure, sepsis from infected wounds, and complications likely linked to type 2 diabetes. More striking than the death itself was the unusual silence that followed. The Privy Council withheld the news for 3 full days while they secured power around young Eddie VI. This delay proved to be a smooth transfer of authority was essential, while Harry's body lay cooling in his chamber. Eddie Simmons, Earl of Hertford and uncle to the new monarch, acted with relentless precision to seize power. Secret gatherings took place, key strongholds were secured, and possible opponents were removed before the public learned of Harry's death on the 31st of January. When the bells of London tolled to signify the passing of the ruler, Eddie Simmons had already been appointed Lord Protector and Duke of Somerset, effectively governing England on behalf of his nephew. Handling Harry's remains posed distinctive difficulties that shed light on Tudor funeral customs as well as the king's condition at the time of death. Court records reveal that the royal corpse began to decay unusually fast, likely because of the advanced infections already affecting him. The embalmer worked feverishly to prepare the body, extracting internal organs and filling the cavities with aromatic herbs and preservatives. Even these specialists were reportedly shocked by the state of Harry's organs, especially his diseased liver and swollen heart. Harry's coffin had to be specially made to fit his considerable size, said to be almost twice as wide as a typical nobleman's coffin. The heavy weight required a strengthened bier and extra carriers to move it. During the lying in state at Whitehall, witnesses noted that the lead-lined coffin actually cracked due to the gases building up inside. The decomposing body oozed fluids onto the chapel floor, a gruesome detail that was quickly concealed, but reports claimed that dogs licked the leaking secretion. This created a disturbing last indignity for a king who was so fixated on grandeur. The funeral procession to Windsor Castle on the 16th of February offered the Tudor regime one last chance to demonstrate Harry's authority, even beyond the grave. Black-draped horses drew the enormous coffin through streets lined with mourners, while effigies presented the king as he looked in his prime, rather than the swollen figure he had become. At St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, Harry was laid to rest beside Jane Simmons, the only wife to bear him a son and heir, and the sole one spared the experience of falling out of royal favor by dying due to childbirth complications before Harry's affections could change. The stark physical reality of Harry's decomposing corpse sharply contradicted the myth-making already in progress about his reign. Court painters like Hans Holbein created the lasting image of Harry as the broad-shouldered symbol of masculine strength, legs firmly set, hands on hips, glaring defiantly at the viewer. This carefully crafted propaganda bore little resemblance to the disease-ravaged body now sealed beneath Windsor's stone floor, yet it became the definitive portrayal of Harry VIII in popular imagination for centuries to come. Harry's will disclosed his final efforts. To shape the future beyond his lifetime, the 30-page document carefully outlined the succession starting with Eddie, followed by Mary, daughter of his first spouse Catherine of Aragon, and ultimately Elizabeth, daughter of Anna Bennet. This clear order of succession, though briefly interrupted by the 9-day rule of Lady Jane Grey, was eventually carried out exactly as Harry had arranged. The king's influence from beyond the grave would persist through all three of his offspring, each becoming Tudor monarchs, before the dynasty ended with Elizabeth I's passing in 6003. More immediately crucial were the power dynamics Harry set for Eddie's minority. The king established a regency council consisting of 16 men who were meant to govern jointly until Eddie turned 18. This balanced system mirrored Harry's suspicion of any single nobleman wielding too much power over his son. Yet his meticulous planning was soon overturned, as Harry Simmons quickly outmaneuvered his fellow council members and was appointed Lord Protector within days of Harry's death. The rapid way in which Harry's intentions were disregarded revealed the limits of even a king's authority once death had removed his commanding presence. The medical story of Harry's final days continues to captivate scholars and doctors, with his symptoms having been retrospectively interpreted as signs of illnesses ranging from syphilis to scurvy, though the strongest evidence points to type 2 diabetes, complicated by other factors. The king's medical records reveal a history of increasingly desperate treatments for chronic osteomyelitis. These range from the application of live pigeons, sliced in half and placed on his festering wounds, to experimental mixtures containing gold and crushed precious stones. Such costly but ineffective remedies, highlight both the limitations of Tudor-era medicine and the extraordinary efforts made for a patient of Harry's standing. Perhaps the most touching discoveries were the personal items found in the king's chambers following his death. Among the usual symbols of royal authority, such as jeweled daggers, official seals, and diplomatic letters, servants uncovered a small locked box holding more private belongings: a miniature portrait of Jane Simmons, a lock of hair believed to belong to his mother, Elizabeth of York, and a child's handwritten prayer book, possibly owned by Elizabeth before her mother's execution. These touching details reveal a glimpse of the man behind the fearsome reputation, hinting that even as his body and mind declined, Harry held on to connections with family and personal emotions. The king's passing sparked immediate political shifts that would influence England's future for many years. The conservative Catholic faction that had held sway during Harry's later years was suddenly pushed aside as Eddie Seymour secured a firmly Protestant regency. Archbishop Cranmer, who had administered the last rites to the dying king, now sped up religious reforms. Harry had taken a more measured approach, as the first English Book of Common Prayer was released just 2 years following Harry's death, steering England closer to Protestant beliefs than the king had ever planned. Harry's intricate religious stance, having broken away from Rome yet preserving many Catholic traditions, left a complicated legacy that enabled both Protestant and Catholic groups to claim him. Protestant reformers highlighted his refusal of papal authority, while Catholics pointed to his support of transubstantiation and his resistance to Lutheran ideas. This religious uncertainty would ignite conflicts during the reigns of all 3 of his children, as England shifted from intense Protestantism under Eddie to Catholic restoration under Mary, and ultimately to the balanced path set by Elizabeth. The king's death also signified a vital moment in Tudor propaganda. Having portrayed Harry as England's guardian against foreign dangers and papal oppression, royal propagandists were now challenged with passing this image to a 9-year-old boy. Paintings of young Eddie VI intentionally mirrored his father's famous pose, showing the child with the same wide-legged stance and bold look that defined Harry's most well-known portraits. Court events stressed continuity, with nobles required to bow to Eddie's vacant throne with the same solemn respect. Beyond his political influence, Harry's death resonated deeply throughout everyday life in England. For nearly 4 decades, he stood as the living symbol of royal power. His character and unpredictable nature directly influenced governance even at the local level. His passing left a void not only in politics, but in the collective mindset. Parish records from early 1547 show widespread fear about what lay ahead, with more accounts of prophetic dreams, unusual celestial signs, and even alleged ghost appearances. For people immersed in religious symbolism, losing such a commanding monarch inevitably carried a feeling of impending doom. The international reaction to Harry's death revealed England's complicated role within Europe at that time. The French ambassador conveyed that King Francis II sincerely grieved the loss of his beloved brother from England, despite past clashes. Emperor Charles V, nephew of Catherine of Aragon, took a more practical view by considering whether England might become vulnerable to invasion or political maneuvering under a child monarch. Pope Paul III, who had condemned Harry 10 years prior, is said to have held a mass for his soul. This was a diplomatic act, acknowledging Harry's importance while affirming the Catholic Church's spiritual claim over him. The private chambers in Whitehall Palace, where Harry died, soon became a place filled with symbolic weight. The historical importance of this event was felt almost instantly as courtiers expressed unease about entering the chambers where the king had endured his final suffering. Reports of eerie noises and unexplained cold spots stirred superstitious anxieties. The young Eddie VI reportedly refused to rest in his father's bed, demanding new rooms be prepared instead. This psychological aftermath reveals the deep emotional toll Henry's passing had on those who had closely observed his decline, many of whom had dedicated themselves to anticipating and meeting his unpredictable wishes. Henry's medical situation is one of the most thoroughly documented royal deaths in history, offering valuable insight into medical practices during the Tudor period. His doctors kept meticulous notes on the treatments given in his last months, with these records preserved as proof that every possible effort was made to save the monarch. These documents show a blend of ancient Galenic remedies and early Renaissance innovations, including heated cupping to extract bad humors, herbal medicines drawn from classical sources, and primitive hydrotherapy. The failure of these methods highlights the limitations faced even by the most skilled physicians of that time. The king's concern for his legacy was also evident in the explicit instructions he left for his tomb. He envisioned a grand monument that would surpass all other royal resting places in England. Henry commissioned intricate designs featuring 40 life-sized bronze figures, a testament to his desire for a lasting and imposing memorial. Sculpted figures and a soaring central edifice crowned with a horseback statue of himself. This lavish design mirrored both his immense pride and his unease about how future generations would perceive him. Ironically, the enormous endeavor was left incomplete because of financial difficulties, and the intended bronze sculptures were eventually melted down during the English Civil War, an outcome that would have deeply annoyed the image-conscious ruler. In the immediate period following Harry's passing, there was a surge of efforts to either claim or dissociate from his heritage. Courtiers, who had lost favor in his later years, reappeared from seclusion, while others who had benefited from his support hurried to forge new alliances. Archives hold touching letters from royal attendants suddenly deprived of their roles after many years dedicated to attending the king personally. For numerous individuals, adapting was a challenge. The abilities needed to handle Harry's unpredictable temperament were hardly useful in the more controlled court of Eddie VI. Several former favorites took their own lives in the months after the king's death, unable to cope with the swift shifts in authority. Perhaps above all, Harry's demise signaled the start of a crucial change in English rule, moving away from an absolutist sovereign whose personal desires shaped policy towards more cooperative systems where power was shared between the monarchy and the nobility. As Lord Protector, Seymour did not possess Harry's commanding personal influence and depended considerably more on the approval of the council. Although this change was momentarily reversed during Mary's rule, it set important precedents for limiting royal power. These precedents would further evolve under Elizabeth and eventually play a crucial role in England's distinctive constitutional development. Harry's passing, therefore, ironically weakened the very foundation of absolute monarchy that he had devoted his life to reinforcing. The king's final illness sparked deep medical reflection, with each generation of doctors re-examining his symptoms through the lens of their era's medical knowledge. Victorian physicians, influenced by moral views on illness, often attributed syphilis as the likely cause, interpreting Harry's condition as divine punishment for his licentiousness. Specialists in the early 20th century shifted the focus toward metabolic diseases, suggesting gout and diabetes as the main reasons. More recent medical historians have advanced more intricate diagnoses, including Emmeloud syndrome, a rare genetic disorder potentially explaining both his declining physical health and mental state, as well as chronic traumatic encephalopathy resulting from repeated jousting injuries in his youth. The distribution of Harry's personal effects offers valuable insight into Tudor perspectives on death and commemoration. Records from the court reveal that items connected to the king during his final days were handled with exceptional reverence, reflecting the era's attitudes toward royal mortality and memory preservation. Some items were preserved as near relics despite the official Protestant disapproval of such customs. His last set of nightclothes, stained with bodily fluids, was ceremoniously burned under Cranmer's supervision, an act that combined practical cleanliness with symbolic meaning. More precious belongings, including his large collection of astronomical instruments and maps, were meticulously recorded before being either distributed according to his will or kept for Eddie's education. Harry's death left his surviving wives and children in delicate situations that required careful handling of court politics. Catherine Parr, his widow, observed a dignified public mourning, but privately moved quickly to marry her true love, Thomas Seymour, a marriage she had postponed during Harry's lifetime. 9-year-old Eddie now held the title of king, but was heavily controlled by his uncles, the Seymours. He noted his father's passing with a chilling detachment in his diary. The Emperor's ambassador was summoned home on the 4th of January upon the death of the king, my father, whose soul God pardon. This formal, emotionless entry reveals the distant personal relationship between father and son. Meanwhile, Harry's daughters confronted their own difficulties under the new rulers. Mary, at 31 years old, stayed a devoted Catholic who grew more estranged by Eddie's Protestant reforms. Elizabeth, only 13, had to carefully maneuver through court life with exceptional caution, since her position was made insecure by her mother's history. The execution and ongoing doubts about her legitimacy affected both princesses, who would ultimately claim the throne Harry had promised them. But the journey proved perilous. Mary narrowly escaped execution during Wyatt's rebellion, while Elizabeth was imprisoned in the Tower throughout her sister's reign. The descriptions of Harry's last moments uncover the profound solitude even the most powerful ruler experiences at the time of death. Despite being surrounded by doctors, attendants, and courtiers, historical documents suggest Harry faced his final hours in essential seclusion, separated from others by both his royal rank and the deeply personal nature of death. Archbishop Cranmer attempted to offer spiritual solace, yet reportedly received little response aside from a final handshake. The king, who had demanded total obedience across his land, ultimately faced the final passage alone, a poignant reminder of how mortality unites all, regardless of status. The year after Harry's death revealed just how much his personality had shaped English governance. Administrative records indicate a mounting pile of decisions that had awaited his personal input, many of which might have been handled by officials, but were instead escalated to the monarch because of a culture that emphasized strict deference. During Eddie's regency, government systems had to be reorganized to operate without the king's direct involvement. This shift was initially disorderly as processes adapted to function independently, but it marked a crucial transition in ruling without the presence of the sovereign. The development of bureaucratic systems capable of functioning independently from the monarch's direct supervision ultimately reinforced institutional governance. Harry's elaborate funeral procession marked his final public appearance in England's grand stage of power. Contemporary descriptions depict horses cloaked in black velvet, heralds carrying ceremonial weapons, and a life-sized wax figure of the king fully dressed in royal attire placed atop his coffin. This artificial representation replaced the decaying natural body beneath. The procession traveled from London to Windsor over several days, allowing thousands of citizens to witness this ultimate display of Tudor majesty. The precise coordination revealed a profound concern about political transition, using ritual to emphasize that although the king might pass away, the monarchy itself would persist. Court physicians who had failed to save the king encountered uncertain futures afterward. Medical records indicate some quickly found new roles with other noble families, while others suffered professional exclusion due to their association with Harry's unsuccessful treatment. Dr. Thomas Miller, who had the courage to inform Harry of his imminent death when others hesitated, transformed this bold act into ongoing royal service under Eddie VI. Meanwhile, the king's apothecaries underwent thorough scrutiny, as inventories of medicines provided during Harry's final illness were examined closely for any evidence of negligence or possibly intentional wrongdoing. The scientific investigation of Harry's remains during vault renovations in the 19th century offered intriguing clues about his condition at the time of death. Workers noted discovering a massive skeleton matching Harry's known height, with clear signs of severe joint damage, especially in the legs. Applying modern forensic methods to old medical documents suggests Harry might have weighed an astonishing amount, close to 400 pounds by the end, with a waist size larger than 50 inches. This intense obesity, combined with poor blood flow in his legs and open sores mentioned in period accounts, would have created perfect conditions for sepsis, which likely played a critical role in causing his demise. Perhaps the most striking insight from Harry's final days is what it reveals about the limits of power. The king who transformed England's religious system, executed queens and nobles without hesitation, and commissioned a navy that would dominate the seas, was ultimately powerless against his own body's decline. Court records depict moments when Harry angrily confronted his doctors, insisting they restore his health through the sheer authority of royal order. This futile resistance against biological truth exposes the fundamental contradiction of absolute monarchy, the unavoidable fragility of even the most influential individual's body when faced with illness, deterioration, and death. The religious uncertainty surrounding Harry's passing allowed room. Competing narratives emerged to serve different political agendas. Protestant chroniclers highlighted the king's final moments filled with evangelical clarity, while Catholic authors outside of England portrayed a monarch burdened by remorse for his rupture with Rome. In truth, evidence reveals that Harry upheld his typical religious stance until his death, viewing himself as the supreme leader of the English Church while rejecting central Protestant beliefs. This intricate theological position, largely Catholic in ritual but dismissing papal authority, mirrored the king's lifelong habit of molding institutions to fit his personal requirements instead of adhering to prevailing norms. The economic fallout from Harry's passing reached far beyond the royal court. Financial documents show that the new Regency government inherited an impoverished treasury and degraded currency caused by Harry's costly foreign campaigns and extravagant personal expenses. Some estimates suggest that during his reign, he spent the equivalent of 200 million on palaces alone. This fiscal crisis compelled Eddie Seymour to uphold Harry's contentious policy of selling monastic estates, accelerating one of the greatest property redistributions in English history. The economic effects of Harry's lavishness fueled inflation and social tension throughout the reigns of his children. Harry's deteriorating health also played a significant role as a powerful symbol for those living at the time, many of whom saw the king's body as representing the nation itself. Just as medieval political thought depicted the monarch as the head of the political body, Tudor writers saw Harry's decaying flesh as a sign of deeper corruption within the kingdom. Sermons that have survived from the year 1547 reveal preachers drawing clear comparisons between the king's infected limbs and the moral decay they believed was present in English society. This symbolic interpretation became politically useful during Eddie's reign, as reformers claimed that just as Harry's body needed drastic treatment, so England's religious customs required cleansing. The final moments of Harry VIII mark a distinctive point where medieval and early modern ideas about kingship intersected. On the one side, the elaborate funeral rites focused on proper burial and concerns over succession followed age-old royal death traditions that stretched back centuries. On the other, the precise medical documentation, the legal clarity of Harry's will, and the ongoing function of government institutions embodied newer methods of state control. Harry died bridging two times, being the last English ruler to hold genuinely medieval power, while also initiating the bureaucratic machinery that would shape future rule. What makes Harry VIII's death so fascinating is not only the grim physical details or political weight, but also the way it symbolizes a transition between eras. The story uncovers profound truths about the very nature of being human. The monarch who had ruled his time with overwhelming charisma found himself at the end of his life confronting the same boundaries that affect even the most ordinary person. Accounts from his era describe Harry as having faced moments of deep existential fear in his last days, meeting judgment not as a ruler but simply as a human being. The Archbishop of Canterbury is said to have reminded him during the administration of last rites that you are about to enter a realm where no titles hold power and no worldly influence can offer protection. In this ultimate moment of human frailty, perhaps England's most notorious king discovered a bond with his people that had escaped him throughout his entire reign.